2, 1.
Hello and welcome, friends, to this week's edition of Truth to Power here on Forward Radio, your community radio station, broadcasting from the top of the historic Hayburn building here in downtown Louisville at 106.5 FM, and we live stream to the world at forwardradio.org. Greetings to listeners all around. What we do each week here on Truth to Power is gather folks from around the community for important conversations that you won't hear anywhere else in the mainstream media. My name is Justin Mogg, host of Sustainability Now. We always try and get a bunch of programmers in the virtual studio with us each week for Truth to Power. Joining me again this week is Hart Hagan from Let's Talk and the Climate Report. Hey, Hart.
Hey, Justin, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good.
I see you made it into the studio despite the rain, and we need to say that Justin lives the sustainable life. He does not have a car, has never had a driver's license. He gets everywhere on his bike. Somehow, he and Amanda, his wife, farm via bike. I have never quite figured that out, but they seem to make it work. And I'm really happy you made it into the studio, Justin.
Oh, it was no problem at all. I dodged the raindrops and the KKK here in Louisville today. We're recording on June 27th.
If you can do both, you're doing good.
Yeah, right. We're not going to talk about that today. We're actually going to return for a more in-depth conversation on something we've touched on a few times on this program that really does warrant more attention, and that's the proposed pipeline in Bullitt County. Joining us again in the virtual studio are a couple of folks who are quite knowledgeable about this subject. One of the neighbors to the proposed pipeline is Christy Collins. Welcome again, Christy.
Hi, how are you?
Good to have you back. I'm well. And Elaine Tanner's back with us, Program Director for the Friends for Environmental Justice. Hey, Elaine.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
And again, you can find them at friendsforenvironmentaljustice.org. And again, just a reminder that a lot of folks here in Louisville especially may already be aware of this issue because of the attention that Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest has brought to the issue, because the proposed pipeline does go right through a newly acquired piece of property on the north end of the forest. So you can learn more about the issue at bernheim.org/forest under threat. And I had some folks from Bernheim on my show on Sustainability Now many weeks ago, so actually months ago. So you could find that in the archives at forwardradio.org. But let's dive back into this topic today. So is it really true that LG&E still wants to build a pipeline in Bullitt County? What is the current status of this idea?
Well, LG&E wants to build a pipeline in Bullitt County. It's approximately 11 to 14 miles long, depending on the route that they go. And so the answer to that is yes, they do want to build a pipeline in Bullitt County. And we have every reason to believe, based on court documents, et cetera, based on public information, based on admissions by Jim Beam and LG&E, that this pipeline is entirely for Jim Beam. It's primarily, if not entirely, to serve one customer. So that's the reason for it. And so that's the answer to that question. I know later on in the questioning, we're going to talk about are there reasons to not build this pipeline. I'm going to go into a little bit of that now. I mean, you got climate, you've got, a pipeline, apart from the natural gas that it carries, a pipeline has lots of concrete and lots of, just toxic metals, et cetera. And plus it's going to go through prime farmland. It's going to go through Bernheim Forest. And it's only, anything that might, it's for the profits of two companies almost exclusively. So it's arguably, it's at the expense of the people of Bullitt County. It's at the expense of the planet. It's at the expense of the water quality. Christy will have a lot to say about that. And it's for, to put more money into the pockets of two big corporations, arguably.
And Elaine, you and the Friends for Environmental Justice have had some successes and some losses, I'm sure, as well, in battling this kind of fossil fuel infrastructure in our region, correct?
Yes, I relocated from Ohio back in the fall. And it's all over. And in the community that I came from, I had Rover, which was 242-inch pipelines. I had Nexus. I had the Utopia East, Sunoco, and I found myself surrounded by pipelines. And I worked that a little bit, thinking we could, make some noise. And then they threatened us with Cabot Oil coming in with 50,000 frac wells. And that's when we had to organize our community, get people on board, doing things such as health studies, getting baseline water testing. And we have a company in California that we had worked out a pricing so that people could actually have their water tested and not rely on corporations testing. And we ran them off. They said they didn't find what they wanted, and they ended up with 4 wells in the area. The pipelines are there, but it's hard when they're not producing, and with what's going on in the big picture of oil and gas right now. So those pipelines are flowing, but the problem is on the Rover, for example, it's flowing across 4 states, and it's going into Canada and then being exported. So, we talked a little bit about eminent domain, and the purpose of eminent domain is that it does something for the people. And just like in this situation, how can the people benefit with Jim Beam having the pipeline, and these people cannot sign in to tap into those gas lines? It's not for the people, and that alone should be the reason that stopped. Just recently, this week in Pennsylvania, a very similar case on eminent domain was challenged, and their Supreme Court said that the people were right, that eminent domain was not to allow these corporations to run wild over our land. So it was pretty awesome.
Nice. Yeah, those successes are important, and I think that just the act of organizing the community is valuable, right? This could be the jumping off point for more community action, right?
Yes, Friends for Environmental Justice, what we do, okay, so we're out there. We have our website and our Facebook group, and we get information out to the people. Well, when people see things happening, then they reach out. So as Christy reached out to me, and sometimes just being able to communicate on, well, this didn't work for us, but maybe this here, or to come up with ideas. And so we're doing some things that we're working on to be able to make a little bit more noise.
Yeah. So Christy, you reached out to Elaine. Tell us how the fight is going and what the current state of things are.
Well, current state, Bernheim did not do well in eminent domain court. The landowners are very concerned over that. There will be an appeals on that. So Bernheim is going to fight it. Outside of that, we are still doing the whole EEC case, which I'm now having to file other cases to this EEC case. So that way everything is addressed under what should have been for the provisions of all the planning procedures, because they're trying to say that some of the things that we've been arguing about all along is new information, which it isn't. That was what the application was started for. Not only was it started for, we've been arguing about it all along. So we're now having to do additional cases to that case, as well as Bernheim is following through with the PSC case.
And let me just, for our listeners, let's make these acronyms clear.
Yeah.
An EEC case is the Energy and Environment Cabinet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is the Kentucky State Energy Environment Cabinet, and the other one is the Public Service Commission.
The PSC, which oversees all utilities in Kentucky, and LG&E is our local utility, but it's not really public, is it?
This is not for public interest at all. It is for Jim Beam and is for future development. It's not that any of these landowners that is facing eminent domain will be receiving gas or any type of anything. Now, there might be future developments later, but right now there's kind of like a play that they're doing with certain things, as far as saying that now that you're saying that they can't do any more new gas, anything like that, when before they had all kinds, but now they're trying to do that as a tactic to try to force the community to turn against the landowners that are not going to sign for eminent domain.
And what redress do landowners have in cases like this, when a big corporation comes in and says they want to put a pipeline through your land? If they don't get your permission, I guess their only option then is to claim eminent domain. Now that it sounds like in eminent domain court they weren't very successful, what does that mean? Do they mean they're just going to reroute it to more sympathetic landowners, or where do they go from here?
I
With
can
the
share
eminent
some information. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Christy. I can follow up with that. So
You handle it.
no, I was just going to share a case that had happened in the past. In the people had lived out in the country in the middle of nowhere, and this pipeline came through, and they were having the sinkholes, and they were having their life disturbed night and day. They were working 24 hours a day. Their goats were dying. These pipelines were 50 feet from their kids' bedrooms. So there was a deadline for trees to be cut, and they broke that deadline. Now, the companies can't cut trees after a certain date, but a property owner can. So they had a deadline. If they didn't get those trees, that pipeline was not going in. And they said they were going to do the eminent domain. They had, said, okay, whatever. Well, they never received any paperwork. They went ahead and took the trees. And she was so upset. I mean, this is her life and their business and everything. So she took them to court. And or they took her to court, I should say. And when they went into court, it was a federal court. And when they went into court in Columbus, they ended up, because there was no paperwork to follow up, there was no lease, there was no agreement, they were on the land, the judge actually made them go do their job. And, the eminent domain went through, the pipeline was already in, but that was challenged, and it is still being challenged. So these things take years to accomplish. Sorry, Christy.
If I can respond, Justin, your question is about what is the redress of the property owners if they don't like the way the eminent domain, or for one thing that is in court, and Christy knows a lot more about this than I do, but there's the eminent domain. So that is what the kind of the legal theory that LG&E uses to say we need this property. And so one thing the property owners are saying is that this is not in the public interest. Another thing the property owners are saying is that LG&E doesn't have anything close to the proper permits that are needed to have a path for this pipeline. Permits include water quality. Permits include wildlife, fish and wildlife. Christy, what are the kind of permits and what are the kind of studies that have to be done? And also we were talking about the FEMA floodplain and how that plays into it. So, LG&E is using old data for the FEMA floodplain. What's that about?
In eminent domain court, what they did on their site plan, they submitted a very generic site plan without any parcels showing any type of structure on these site plans. Like on one of the property owners, Vanessa Allen, when they submitted to eminent domain court, they literally did not put her house or her garage or her pond or where her septic tank was, and how the proximity of this pipeline and how close it would be when they submitted that to eminent domain court. Literally, when you do that, that's kind of falsifying government documents to a certain degree, because you have to put that proximity and that distance in there to show how far that's going to be, especially to certain structures and something just even as much as a septic tank. You have to have that in there, and they did not do that with eminent domain court. Now I do believe that they made them they could go back and they had to redo a site plan and everything. But when they tried to originally submit it, they tried to submit it under those pretenses. And not only that, but they're using old FEMA maps from like 2016, which are not current to 2020, of what the now current flood status is based off the erosion and the way that the climate has been and the flooding that has just continued to open up more sinkholes and erode away.
And so we're talking about these floodplain issues because there is a potential risk to water quality here, right? It's one of the major concerns around putting in a pipeline. We know that these pipelines have a history of leaking, right?
Yes, they do. But the thing is, with this floodplain, they're going underneath the creeks and streams. This was supposed to be 5 to 6 feet deep. They're only going 24 to 30 inches. One of the ladies, which I don't know if she wants her name out there or not, she literally gets landlocked by floodwater every spring and every fall when it floods now. I mean, if something was to happen with something like that, emergency responders cannot get to her at all.
Wow.
So one issue, one reason we're talking about floodplain, it does relate to water quality. That's one thing. Another thing, it relates to who can and can't get flood insurance. Another thing, how much of a floodplain they're in, that relates to whether fire trucks and EMS vehicles can get in and out. So what else does the floodplain relate to, Christy? Am I hitting on the main ones, or am I leaving something out?
Well, they're talking about doing concrete mats, and at 24 to like 34 inches or 30 inches, that's not even 3 feet at that point. Water will erode concrete over time, just like it does in driveways where you see them crack, things like that, because they don't have a lot of footing or foundation. So they're going to have these concrete mats on top of, like, as a cap in a floodplain in an area with geologically has a lot of salts, which means it's going to erode away these concrete mats. And with it only being that short of a proximity to that, if there should be any cracks in the pipes, the welds, anything like that, and a lot of times they're known for the welds or the screws, you know, not to have a great connection, especially over time in the shifting and karst terrain, which, you know, will bend and contort that pipe after, you know, with the expansion and contraction of either a drought or even a freeze or a frost, which means it can pollute that waterway.
And people's drinking water as well, right? Most of the residents around here rely on home wells.
They do. There's a lot of areas out here that does not have running water, that do have wells, or they have to have cisterns or be on some sort of reserve water. And in that aspect, I mean, to the proximity of how this is going to be, even like old cisterns or wells, you know, if they're polluting the groundwater at that point, what are they drinking?
So, Christy, you were saying that the, well, let me just ask you generally, is Bullitt County government doing its job? And that's one thing. Then maybe we can get to the state, but, you know, what's going on in Bullitt County government that maybe should deserve a little bit of scrutiny?
Oh, well, I don't think that they're quite aware of what Nationwide Permit 12 is, and that they do not have Army Corps approval for the eminent domain case. I don't think they're quite aware of that and the effect that that's going to be. I think they do think that they have the permits. I do know when this was locally, county issued with the floodplain, the lady did not have floodplain certification. She was a planning and design official, which to basically sign off on something without having the FEMA certification, I don't know how that's possible, but it was. The judge used to work for Jim Beam, the one who is like consolidated and was all for this. So how can you be with Jim Beam at one point, become our judge executive, and now basically promoted?
So why can't you be on the government payroll and still work for a private company? I mean, why is that even a problem?
That would be a conflict of interest.
Right.
He should have excluded himself.
I was trying to be funny. It's obviously very weak.
I got you, Hart. So, I mean, what would be the Bullitt County's government's role in this? Isn't this a state issue or a public service commission issue, or does the county need to sign off as well?
They do.
Oh, okay.
Way it goes is when you get this, you go through the state unless it has to go through FERC. If it goes through FERC, you go through federal, state, and the county. But the county signed off even before the state did.
Wow.
So FERC is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Thank you, Hart.
One thing that I noticed, I looked at the, the documents that have been released. There was a great article by Ryan Van Velser of WFPL who revealed some of this, and I clicked on some of the links that he provided. And these talks between Jim Beam and LG&E have been going on for at least 5 years. And they've been going on with certain public officials certain key public officials in Bullitt County that it's like, why is this not public information from the get-go? It appears, if you read these documents, that Jim Beam officials and LG&E officials and Bullitt County officials have been talking about this, knowing that it's not public information and planning for something that they were going to keep quiet until they had to, make it public. So am I on the right track with that, Christy?
Well, first they tried to say that it was under terrorism. And then they said they had a private company that they cannot name, which was Jim Beam. It's out now, that there was a big major company that they were servicing. They've tried everything they can to basically keep the information away from the people. Now, that's like these wells. They're throwing a fit in these hearings about these wells. They don't want it here. They object the whole entire time that they have dug these wells to 320 to 340 feet. Some of them have tapped into natural gas. We've been told that they were for clean out. We were also told at one point it was for storage. And they will not be forthcoming with any information of what they're going to do with these wells. And there's been 12 of those, and plus over 100 core samplings that has damaged other properties now that are outside the pipeline path, and their lifeline is their livelihood.
So clean out, we learned that, we're talking to Justin Noble, who has done a lot of research into radioactivity in oil and gas. And, okay, so let me preface by saying LG&E, if you're watching, if we say anything inaccurate, give us a call. You have an honorary seat in these discussions. We don't want to say anything that's inaccurate, but if you're only telling us so much, then we have to speculate. And so we know that somebody drilled 12 320-foot holes in Bullitt County. We can only speculate as to why. We were thinking that they might be some kind of commercial natural gas storage facility that may or may not make sense. But what makes the most sense at this point is that those 320 to 340-foot holes, 12 of them, are for clean out. Now, what clean out could be is that the pipeline has to be cleaned from time to time. One of the things, if you have a natural gas pipeline, then you have radon. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christy. If you have radon in that, the radon is radioactive. It decays into radium and polonium, which are metals which get stuck in the valves and get stuck in the pumps. It has to be cleaned out. It's radioactive. So the 320-foot holes might be to take that toxic waste and put it down in there. If that's not it, LG&E, then talk to us.
Our guest today here on Truth to Power, you just heard from Hart Hagan, host of the Climate Report and Let's Talk here on Forward Radio. My name is Justin Mogg, host of Sustainability Now, and our guests are Christy Collins, a neighbor to this proposed pipeline in Bullitt County, and Elaine Tanner from Friends for Environmental Justice. We are continuing to discuss the LG&E's proposed pipeline in Bullitt County. Does this not cross any county lines? I was wondering that too. Is this just a Bullitt County issue?
Ironically, this past week I found a document, I don't remember if it was to the EEC or the PSC, where they called it the New Calvary Pipeline. The Calvary Pipeline goes through several counties.
Huh.
States.
8 counties.
It goes through several states.
Oh, states.
Yes. This is, and that's when you get into being regulated by FERC or the Federal Regulatory Agency. And if it crosses those state lines, you have what's called interstate and intrastate. So there's, those regulations kind of cross. But yeah, that old Calvary's been around a long time. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 70 years old. And at one point in these older pipelines, they were wanting to, again, add new pipelines alongside of them, or they would also try to reverse the flow in some of these pipelines. And we were talking a little bit about this clean out. I'd like to go back on that a little bit. I just learned this weekend that one of the things they do is they take a cleaner and it goes through these pipelines, and then so there would be waste. But in compressor stations that I've worked with in the past on some of the, this mega project that's up along the Ohio River Valley, the petrochemical, they would do a transfer station. And when they would do this pigging, they would do it, no notice. I had I attend a lot of times, and I would recommend that people do this. When there are hearings on these things, we have a public comment, do it. Make sure that your voice is heard, whether it be a written comment. Now with this pandemic, they're trying to, kind of put us out a little bit. We just, they want it, you can call in, we can Zoom in, but we're not getting that real contact, that real message across. And this is important that the people are heard, because then that documents what these issues are. It's not going to change a lot today, but in the future, it will give us leverage.
And when we think about these pipelines, they're really part of a network. And I don't know how publicly available information, are these things mapped? Can we see where all these pipelines run? Like you said at the top, Elaine, you're surrounded by them, right? We can't escape them.
Fracktracker.com, and we were hoping to bring in TEDWalk at some point, and it's just a matter of getting everybody in the right place. And they have a website, and you can go in and you can put your zip code or your county or wherever you're looking, and if it's an existing pipeline, you will be able to find that information. And it looks like you take a map of the so-called United States, and you look at this map, and you hardly see land. It's all pipeline. My county commissioner in the past, when I started investigating, he said, you would not believe how many pipelines are in this county. And I looked, yeah, I do. I know, because I had that valuable information at my fingertips. Those are our toolbox, in our toolbox.
Well,
and that would be fracktracker.com. Sorry.
I was going to say, to add to this, the Calvary pipeline that is in Mount Washington, it cannot pass inspection. It has a drill bit that is sheared off into it and has not passed inspection. They've done repair after repair after repair trying to get it up to par, but it's still not up to par today. They're just saying now that it's okay, it's copacetic.
For profit, okay, so I want to say LG&E, you can contact me at info@theclimatereport.net. That's info@theclimatereport.net. If we say anything inaccurate, my phone number is 502-303-8293, 502-303-8293. So LG&E is a for-profit utility. I'm not saying that it's exactly the same thing as every other for-profit utility, but in California, Pacific Gas and Electric has a terrible reputation for letting things go and not doing the repairs that are needed. So, Christy, I'm assuming that LG&E owns the Calvary pipeline, or whoever owns it. If it's a for-profit company, they don't have the proper balance of public interest with private interest. So it's natural, it's normal for a for-profit company to put off repair and maintenance as long as they can, because that goes to their profits. And then when they get sued, or they cause damage, or they cause the loss of life, and they have to pay damages in a lawsuit, that's just a cost of doing business. So that's why, as long as we're dealing with a for-profit utility, you have to watch them like a hawk, because, so, maybe at some point we can talk a little more about the state of repair of these pipelines. Most of us are just, this is not even our day job. We're at a little bit of a disadvantage. So anyway, just saying.
Just to clarify for our listeners too, I'm checking it out now. It's fractracker.org, actually, fractracker.org, and that's FRAC tracker.org. It's a great place to get more information about this. What do we feel about the state government's response to this? Have they been sort of sanding the gears in the process in a little bit? It seems like that's the case, or are they just trying to ram it through? What do we feel about the state's response?
Do you want my opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My opinion, I think they've rolled over for revenue money. It pays their salary. It's revenue money. Revenue, anything that gets paid into the state, that pays their salary. And to a certain degree, I feel like they just get slapped on the hands, because that's their paycheck.
So the question is, what is the government doing or not doing? Is the government being sand in the gears? One thing is Department of Fish and Wildlife. The question is, not claiming to know anything, but the question is, do they take money in exchange for the ability to destroy a population of bats or to pave over a population of a rare plant species? Do they take money in exchange for the right to do these things? We have reason to believe that some of that is going on. And another thing is the Department of Water doing its job when it comes to requiring the proper permits? Is the Department of Fish and Wildlife doing its job when it comes to requiring the proper permits?
Connection.
Okay. We can hear you anyway. So, and okay, so I talked about Fish and Wildlife and Department of Water, and anyway, forgot the third thing I was going to say. We'll have to go on with it.
Elaine, in your experience, are state governments on the side of, in general, of those who want to build pipelines, or do they have the citizens in mind?
They are looking at, especially take Kentucky, we've had all this coal severance that has disappeared over the years, and they have this big, great promise of taxes, and it's going to go into the schools and millions of dollars to build new schools. And then in my experience, what I've seen is they're in there trying to get those taxes reduced to 20% rather than the billions of dollars coming into the economy. It's not happening. And so it's false promises coming in, and we can't live on false promises, and it ends up being a burden to the people.
Yeah. Here's another instance, another way of saying that government is really not being on the side of the people, it's being on the side of the big corporations. And that is, this week has been Pollinator Week. And so everybody's wanting to get on that. Most of that is sincere, but you have the EEC, the Energy and Environment Cabinet, posting a picture. Here's a picture of a right-of-way. Here's some power lines going through an easement that the power lines go through, and underneath the power lines are wildflowers. So, as if to say, we're a power company, but we care about the environment. Now, it would be expected if LG&E is going to post that kind of information, but this comes from the government. The government, at our tax dollars, is giving positive PR. This comes from the Energy and Environment Cabinet on their Facebook feed, etc., giving positive PR for LG&E. Why are they doing this? What's the deal?
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of natural lands to celebrate in Kentucky. They don't have to pick on the power lines as something to highlight. That's a great point. Yeah, and happy Pollinator Week, everybody.
On behalf of the pollinators, I say thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I saw some earlier today, actually, some really happy ones in my garden. But this is
a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you're looking at the relationship between the two, you might want to investigate a little bit of who, we talked a little bit early, in the show, is who is getting that favor. So okay, I'm where am I going to go from here? I'm retired from the state. I'm young still, and then you're appointed to these positions of power. And then you have these connections within the system that you can accomplish these things. And that's what I see is as a problem. There should be, you know, like a clause that says you can't work for, you know, the industry, but, you know, we're not there yet. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Revolving door. You don't have to be bribed if you have the promise of a good job if you go easy on us. And when you come out of your government job, we'll give you a good job. The revolving door policy.
Yeah, it's what makes the best lobbyists, right? Former state workers.
Right.
So how do citizens effectively organize to resist these kinds of takings of private land and threats to our rare ecosystems like in Bernheim? How do we effectively organize against this?
Terrorism. That is a joke. Okay, everybody. At NSA, that is a joke. I know the NSA is watching this. That was a joke. Okay, joke, lighten up. Come on. But seriously, in Louisiana, I posted this week. In Louisiana, there like 6 months ago, there were some people who were protesting the fact that this, you know, petrochemical operation was on top of a plantation or a cemetery, and they were like this peaceful protest, and they were like 6 months later they're arrested for terrorism. I mean, seriously. So they're using these, what's it called, critical infrastructure. If you pose a threat to critical infrastructure, then you can be charged with terrorism, which is, you know, terrorism is this emotional thing, and people get afraid when you start talking about terrorism. So, you know, state governments, federal governments, state governments all over are passing these laws saying that if you protest a pipeline, you're a terrorist.
Yeah, that was some recent legislation passed in the Kentucky legislature this past year, right? With respect to protesting, so quote unquote critical infrastructure, which includes this fossil fuel pipeline stuff, right? Is this part of the ALEC playbook, or where does this come from?
Straight out of ALEC.
You'd think. If it's not from them, they should have thought of it first, you know.
It's a playbook straight out of ALEC.
Okay.
And one of the problems that I see, and I've not done a lot of work in Kentucky because I walked in at the end and the infrastructure bill was on the table and it was signed, or, you know, being prepared to be signed. But I look at that differently as an organizer because of our organization. If I would do a event, for example, we wanted to do an event at you know, by the pipeline, you know, but, you know, we want to say, hey, this is where it's going to be. This is what's going to happen. And I'm sitting in the other side of the state, and I have organized this. My name's on that. My Friends for Environmental Justice is supporting this. We are sponsoring this event. And I'm not even there. And so the whole world knows we've invited people because we want them to understand what's going on. And we have someone, and I want to say from the opposition, because that's basically what it boils down to today in these battles. And as an organizer, they're going to do, I could be fined 10 times and do 10 times more jail time because somebody walked in there and walked onto that job site and they stopped the operation. And I've organized in other areas and we've stayed in the easement. As long as you follow the rules, you can still protest, you can still organize, and you can still get the word out there. The more people, of course, the better. But you know, you have to tell people what's going on. And if we're not getting the press that we need on these things, then we have to create it ourselves, and that's what we do. And we just have to go by their rules. A lot of these infrastructure bills are being challenged. The one in South Dakota that had to do with Standing Rock, that's being challenged. So you know, the fight's there. You have to keep it in. Either it's a legal battle, or I think that what Christy and I both do, and in my mining situation, we go through the state court because that's the people's court, and we can go in there and we can do these things ourselves. You know, you don't have to, you know, I'm not trying to practice law or anything, but you don't have to have a law degree to read the rules and to understand them. I had a hearing officer ask me, I've been sitting on this bench for 6 years, And I don't know what you know
Mhm.
about these permits. And, you know, she's not living it. She's not on the mountain, and she's not watching people die because they've destroyed our water. So,
Mhm.
you know, I kind of look at it a little bit differently than others.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Elaine, you're saying it can be tricky to be an organizer, because you can be an organizer and all your people can be doing the right thing. But here's somebody that goes over and blocks the operations of this pipeline somehow, and that can be, you can be somehow accused of causing that, and you can be charged with all this terrorist activity stuff.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Kind of like the Black Lives Matter situations that we're dealing with, when all of these people are being paid to come in and disrupt the situation.
Oh.
That's what I think.
Wow, yeah.
Just an opinion.
A provocateur, an agent provocateur, somebody that comes in and poses as a protester to stir up trouble.
Exactly.
Well, or even simply the police response itself just incites a violent response from the protesters, because
The police wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that.
We've
I
seen
have
it
to
from
stand up
Standing Rock to Louisville.
for our police for a little
No,
bit.
you're not
because
allowed. You're not allowed. Go ahead. Sorry.
When we organized in some areas, you know, you have they have these what we call private security companies, and they are the goons, and they are mercenaries, and a lot of them were in Iraq. They come here, they have jobs, and they come in and they are relentless. I've seen what they did down in the bayou. My friend Cherie got involved. She was drug into the swamp and she was almost killed, thrown in jail. The stuff that they have done as mercenaries and getting away with it. You know, we've seen these things happen. So in my situation, police are, you know, kind of welcome. And in these small towns where I work a lot, these pipelines are going through. It's like they don't have a clue what's going on, and we go in and we talk to them. And these police officers don't want these pipelines either. So sometimes they're on our side. And the one gentleman from a private security company said, well, they, you know, get them out of here. They're breaking the law. And the officer said they've done nothing wrong. They were, the job was, it was a Saturday there, and we were on a public highway in the easement, and we stayed and we held our, we actually had mock pipelines in our signs and chants. And I worked with the Oberlin College students, and they were just awesome in being able to get those messages across. But I also know that they're willing to go further, and that was my part as a mentor for them to say, okay, you know, you want to go to a graduate school, you know, and so there's things that as an organizer we can do to help our people.
We're talking today here on Truth to Power about organizing against fossil fuel infrastructure, both in the global sense, but right here in our region. LG&E has proposed this pipeline in Bullitt County. You may have heard of it through the Save Bernheim campaign, and you can learn more at bernheim.org/forest under threat. But we're talking today with, just heard from Elaine Tanner, Program Director for the Friends for Environmental Justice. You can find out more about them online at friendsforenvironmentaljustice.org. And Christy Collins is with us. She's a property owner, neighbor to this proposed pipeline. So let's talk in our last bit of the program about what is likely to happen going forward at this point. As Christy mentioned earlier, LG&E did not do so well in court about eminent domain. Are we ready to, you know, break the champagne bottles and celebrate, or is there still a big fight ahead?
There's still a huge fight ahead. LG&E so far, I mean, they're getting what they want so far. It's just we are making sure, you know, that they're following everything that they have to follow, because if they follow that, they cannot win.
But that's a problem, Christy, because they do it anyway. They've got the blessings of the state, and they do it anyway. And I've gone to Washington, and I've ended up seeing this happen, and it's, oh, well, it's done. There's nothing you can do. So we keep the pressure on before it happens.
Yeah, once these pipelines are in the ground, they're not coming out, right?
That would take too much carbon to take them back out after you've already put them in.
And they get repurposed for other uses too, right? We've seen here in Kentucky efforts to try and convert natural gas pipelines into what do they call it? Basically frack waste pipelines, right? The liquid natural, what do they call it? The
Brine. They call it brine.
brine. Yeah. And these other byproducts of fracking that they're hoping to recover some economic value from, but this kind of thicker sludge is even more likely to cause ruptures in these pipelines, right?
What's wrong with a little radioactivity? I mean,
Yeah.
don't knock it till you've tried it.
And it's particularly dangerous in our karst regions, like in Bullitt County, right, where water flows through tremendous caves and sinkholes are forming, and these are real threats to our way of life and our environment here in Kentucky.
This pipeline will go across 7 streams and waterways, which all flow into the Salt River, which all flow into the Ohio River.
I would like to make a comment on that brine because this is a bigger issue, and I think Justin handled a lot of that when you interviewed him. But they're trying to bring in brine up the Ohio, up the Mississippi, up the Ohio from Texas and Louisiana, and Ohio's a dumping ground for frack waste. And Pennsylvania, they kind of said we don't want it, so they ship it over to Ohio. They tried to ship it to Kentucky one time, and that didn't work. So they ended up, with tailings. Tailings are when you frack and you go into the earth and you break up that shale. Well, some of that shale comes back out, and that's tailings, and that's a solid waste, and they have to deal with that also. So, Orsenka is a group, an organization that works around the quality of the river, what happens on the river issues, and that's an organization that right now just tried to eliminate the 10-day, to give us a chance to do our public comments. And I had to do a letter for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth last week that we sent in and said, this is why. If they can't do the job in 5 years, which is my experience, what good is, taking our 10 days away? I mean, keep it on the books. Let's work with what we got so we can get where we need to go.
Well, Elaine, I mean, Ohio state government is all ethical and above board. I mean, what if we got to worry about being downriver from them?
The Ohio River is 913 miles. Start at the petrochemical hub in Pittsburgh. That's the biggest cracker plant in the country. They're trying, and it's kind of calmed down. The oil and gas is kind of on its way out, and I keep saying that because I want to believe that.
Let's hope
so. But so we all live. Wendell says we all live downstream.
Mm.
So if it's coming upstream in barges, and a barge goes into a pylon on a bridge, that's going into your water. The last count I had, 5 million people depended on the Ohio River for their water supply. And at the time I did my research, there were 32 communities that had no backup. And then what we find in other areas when these things happen, how soon do we know? Sometimes it takes 2 days. And how many people have been contaminated in those 2 days before we found out?
Well, let's enumerate some of the threats to the water quality of the Ohio River. I mean, you've got fracking, you've got cracker plants, you've got brine storage. What else?
You got coal waste. It comes in from the Ohio River Basin, actually touches 15 states. So you've got it all. In the area that I came from, excuse me, losing my voice. I lived in the Black River, which was the dirtiest river in the Muskingum Valley watershed, dirtiest river in the Ohio watershed. And we have not been paying attention to what's been going into our water. We tried in 1970, and today, every rule we have had on the books has been annihilated. Our government has destroyed what we have built, what we have done to protect our people. And it seems like our Supreme Courts are backing the people as much as possible today. So I have hope. We have to have hope that our water quality, that people realize that water is life. And that if without it, we won't be here. And it's not, it's bottled water is not the answer. Bottled water is as contaminated as the rest of it. Plus, you're dealing with the plastic bottle. And you know what frack gas does? It makes plastic. And that's a whole issue that, we can get into at some point that we need to address, because it's the use of the plastic that keeps them producing it.
Well, what's wrong with breathing in microplastics?
Yes, and when it breaks down, going down the Mississippi River out into the oceans, it breaks into these tiny parcels. It's even being found in our vegetables growing in our gardens.
And you can only eat so many fish per month or so coming out of the Ohio River. In Kentucky, pregnant women are not supposed to eat fish at all. I mean, what's, is that progress? What have we given up for the sake of a few to enrich, in my opinion, fossil fuel and all these other toxic sources of toxic waste? They enrich a few rich people at everyone else's expense. What am I missing?
You nailed it.
Yeah, and it's especially sad when we know there are alternatives that are also job-creating alternatives, right? To get off of this fossil fuel addiction and to power our future in a way that is clean, non-polluting, and renewable. And we know it won't go away, right? That we will eventually run out of this natural gas. And the only other alternative is to make it ourselves with, say, a biodigester kind of strategy. But these quantities of gas that we're seeing extracted through the most extreme methods we can of the first, man-made earthquakes ever seen on the planet, and these kinds of extreme measures, they're all clinging on to an old way of doing business that we ought to jettison at this point, because we know that it's polluting our local environment, and it's also threatening our ability to sustain life on the planet through global climate change. So it's about time that we started investing our time and attention and resources into alternatives that could be positive for everybody and wouldn't involve these kinds of threatening our neighbors, basically, by putting in dangerous pipelines and taking their lands.
Justin Mogg for president.
Yeah, I'm not running.
Governor, then. Come on, Justin. Step up.
But
The good thing, Justin, is that there are countries that are making these changes. There are states in this country that are making these changes, and we will get there if we have the right people in power. Truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely right, and some of those folks are even running for office right now. I had Charles Booker on my show recently, and he talked quite a bit about the Green New Deal, the need for that nationally, but he also emphasized we need a Kentucky New Deal. As a historic coal state, we really do need to think of a green economic way forward, and so there are visionaries like that on the ballots right now, and that's what gives me hope for sure. In our last few minutes, what do folks want to say to get people involved in this struggle, to learn more? We learned about fractracker.org. Are there other good online resources where folks can learn more? You mentioned WFPL's reporting by Ryan Van Velzer. Hart, anything else folks want to highlight for our listeners to go check out and learn more?
I would say, online is a lot of information. We have to sort it out. So find a reliable source, and our work is, we back it up. We don't want to put stuff out there that, is going to hurt us, because that's, the credibility is so important at this point. So read what you can and follow through. And a lot of times Washington Post does a lot of good things. Common Dreams does a lot of good things, but I post those. And then there's links in there which you can go further. Fractracker.org is where you're going to find what you need. And they don't just have that map of pipelines in that toolbox. They have everything else you want to know as well. That's my go-to site.
There's The Intercept has some good coverage. There's a DSMOG blog. So I have a Facebook group called Louisville Climate News. So.
And we have the Bullitt County Facebook group. That would be Christy. That's exactly?
Bullitt Countyans for Justice.
Yes. And that's awesome, and then we share this information. So then they jump back over here and they're finding more and they get more involved. And that's how, okay, so somebody's mad. Wait a minute, they're putting that in that forest. I go to that forest. I walk that forest. I love that forest. That's a part of my history of my life and my kids' life. And, you know, you got to get that emotion in there to get people. Fear of loss is what, you know, when you're going to lose something that's important to you, then you're going to stand up and you're going to fight back.
Now I
You
know
should.
what's been driving me. And now I understand, Elaine, fear of loss.
That's it.
I mean, seriously, it's like I can't believe. It's like I was asleep at the wheel for like 30 years. I was an environmentalist as a kid, and then 2 to 4 years ago, started becoming more aware of what has been. It's like the media wants to, the mainstream corporate media wants to put you to sleep. And I started being aware that, wow, we're losing so much so fast, needlessly. And bees, butterflies, birds, forests. I mean, when it comes down to it, you know, I see the forests being lost. And I see our health being lost because of a criminally inept food system that we have, where we get food from 1,500 miles away. And when we have Kentucky and Indiana, we have some of the most fertile land in the country, and we get hardly any of our food locally. And that is bad for our health, it's bad for our climate, bad for our water, soil, air. Don't get me started.
Well, and our rural livelihoods too, right? Christy, you want to talk briefly about some of the impacts that your neighbors are fearing or already suffering from this project that affects their livelihoods, right?
Well, some of the people, I mean, they're having sinkholes open up on their property, which is damaging their property, to where one lady has a Christmas tree farm. Now she cannot take people down the route where they would actually come down and see the Christmas trees. Not only that, but it's more the mental duress that they have placed these people under by the threats, the constant overwhelming, we're going to take your land, there's nothing you can do about it. And not only that, but you're going to wind up getting sick over it on top of it because of the emissions. There's a lot going on with the mental duress, more so than, I guess, yeah, they've done all the core samplings. Yes, they are opening up sinkholes, putting cracks in foundations and windows and things like that. All that can be replaced. When you lose time and years fighting for something, you lose joy and happiness. That's different.
Right. It reminds me, one of the property owners wouldn't mind her name being used, but no reason to drag people's names all over everywhere. But they've spent, you know, years of their lives fighting for what's theirs. I mean, here's a piece of property that they don't want a pipeline to go through it. The piece of property is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. LG&E comes along and wants to give them $10,000 for the privilege of putting for an easement of putting a pipeline through it. You know, but irrespective of the economic loss, they're never going to get back the time. They're never going to get back the time and the intention that they could be spending on family issues and life events. And, you know, LG&E is doing all this for money. The people that LG&E threatens to run a pipeline through their land, they just want their time, their land, and they want to not breathe dirty air. They want to not be sitting next to an explosive pipeline. It's not too much to ask.
I've been sitting 16 years in that seat, Hart. I have wasted, I don't want to say wasted because it brought me here to be able to tell you what happened. So I'm not going to go there. But I too did what you did, Hart. I was an activist early on in my life and organized early on. And then I had the job, the family, and until it's in your backyard, then people just ignore it. But when you cannot ignore it any longer, you will rise.
Well, that seems like a pretty good note to end on. I want to thank our guests for joining us again and taking the time. You just heard from Elaine Tanner, Program Director for Friends for Environmental Justice. Find them at friendsforenvironmentaljustice.org. And thanks again, Christy Collins, a neighbor of this proposed pipeline in Bullitt County, for taking the time again to join us here for this community conversation that we do each week here on Truth to Power. Hart Hagan, what's coming up, or what have you been recently covering on the Climate Report every day on this station at 7 p.m.?
I'm always talking about corporate power, Justin. That's my favorite thing. These corporations have wrapped themselves in the American flag. They want you to think that they are the American way. They are that they are business, and business is prosperity, but there's different ways of doing business, and they are not the only way to do business. And business, especially big business, is not the only way to prosperity and happiness. Give me a break. So I'm talking about corporate power this week and almost every week on the Climate Report.
And that's daily at 7 p.m. And tune in to Sustainability Now, Monday at 6 p.m. again at midnight, and Tuesday at 10 a.m. We're going to be talking with Cara Cooper this week. She's coordinator of the Kentucky Solar Advocacy Network. So if you want to learn more about alternatives to all these fossil fuels, tune in to Sustainability Now this week. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back in your ears again in 1 week's time here on Truth to Power.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wonderful, y'all. Really appreciate it.
Sorry, my power went out for a minute.
Yeah, no.